The night my father walked into that hospital room, he wasn't coming to check on me. He was coming because my fiancé called him. And my fiancé, Elliot Hargrove, whose name you might recognize from the side of three buildings in downtown Atlanta, had been sitting beside my bed for 11 hours straight, still in his gala tuxedo, holding my hand while I was unconscious and hooked to monitors. My father pushed open that door expecting to find his disgraced daughter alone. What he found instead was a man who looked up at him slowly, without standing, without smiling, and said, "So you're the man who threw her out in the rain." That sentence, that tone. I wasn't even awake, and I'm told my father's entire face collapsed like something inside him finally cracked. This is the story of how I lost everything because of my brother's lie, and how the truth came back dressed in ways nobody in my family ever saw coming. My name is Simone. I grew up in a three-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia, with my father Raymond, my brother Marcus, and a mother who left when I was 9, not because she didn't love me, but because my father made loving anything in that house feel like a penalty. Daddy was not a cruel man in the way people imagine cruel men. He didn't yell constantly. He didn't drink himself sideways every night. His cruelty was quieter than that and somehow worse for it. It was the kind of cruelty that lived in what he chose to see and what he refused to. He chose to see Marcus. Marcus, 3 years older than me, built like my father's hopes and dreams assembled themselves into a human being. Marcus who could do no wrong. Marcus who failed out of community college twice and my father called it the school's fault. Marcus who borrowed money from every person in our family and called it borrowing even when years passed. Marcus who had the audacity, the God-given audacity, to smile at you while he was picking your pocket. That was my brother. That was the man my father loved without condition, without limit, without a single question asked. Me, I was the one who got questions. Why are your grades like this when they should be better? Why are you staying out? Where are you going? Who are you talking to? Not because he feared for me, because I was an inconvenience he felt obligated to monitor. I used to watch the way his face changed when Marcus walked in a room versus when I did. With Marcus, something in Daddy's shoulders relaxed, like the whole world made sense again. With me, he tensed, like I was a problem he hadn't solved yet. I learned early to make myself small and self-sufficient. I worked through high school, saved my own money, got a partial scholarship to Georgia State and took out loans for the rest. My father contributed nothing, and I never asked him to because asking felt like handing him leverage. I graduated in 3.5 years with a degree in accounting and a second job I'd been working since junior year, cleaning offices at night for a commercial cleaning company called Pristine Solutions. I know how that sounds. A college graduate with an accounting degree, mopping floors at midnight. But the loans were real, and the income at entry-level accounting firms was not enough to cover them fast, and I had a plan. I was always making a plan. That was the only way I knew how to survive, keep my head down, stay on the plan, don't let anyone see how hard you're working because the moment you let people see the effort, they start calculating how to redirect it toward themselves. That's how I met Elliot. I want to be clear about something, because I know how people tell stories like this, and I refuse to let mine be told that way. I did not meet a billionaire and get rescued. I met a man in an empty office at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and he was sitting on the floor of his own conference room, eating a sad desk sandwich because he'd sent his entire staff home and forgotten to order food. He was wearing a flannel shirt. He had ink on his hand. He looked up when I knocked on the open door to ask if I could come in and clean, and he said, "Please, yes, and I'm sorry about the smell. I think the sandwich is already turning." His name was Elliot Hargrove. I did not know who he was. I am not performing humility, I genuinely did not know. I did not follow business news. I cleaned his conference room. He asked me about the book sticking out of my bag, which was a tax law textbook because I was studying for a certification. We talked for 20 minutes about tax code restructuring, which is perhaps the least romantic topic in human history, and somehow I walked out of that building smiling. He left a note the next Tuesday, not a number, not anything presumptuous, a note that said, "I looked up chapter 14, you were right, E." I should have known then that this man was different. Smart people who discover they're wrong and lead with that, different. We dated quietly for 4 months before I told a single person. Not my coworkers, not my girls, nobody. Because I understood something about my life that I couldn't fully articulate yet. The moment something good becomes known in a family like mine, it becomes a resource. People calculate what they can get from it, Marcus especially. Marcus, who had spent his whole life attaching himself to anything that might elevate him without requiring him to actually climb. I was not going to hand him Elliot. What I didn't calculate was that Marcus had already started watching me. I don't know what tipped him off. Maybe I seemed lighter. Maybe I was on my phone differently. Maybe he just had the instinct of a man who's spent his whole life tracking what he doesn't have. Whatever it was, he started paying attention to me in a way he never had before. And with Marcus, attention was never innocent. He followed me one night. I found this out later. He saw Elliot's car, recognized the plates, because Marcus had the particular skill set of a man who reads things he has no business reading, including business gossip blogs and Forbes lists. He knew exactly who Elliot Hargrove was by the time he got back to my father's house that night, and he sat on that information like a spider on a web, waiting for the moment it would be most useful to him. That moment came on a Thursday in October. I had gone by my father's house to drop off some documents he needed for his taxes. I still did his taxes, still did things for this man who looked through me like I was furniture, because that's what you do when you love a parent who doesn't love you back the same way. You keep showing up. You keep hopping. It is an exhausting and humiliating hope, but it is real. Marcus was there. That should have been my first signal to leave, but I sat down. We ate dinner. And somewhere between the cornbread and my father getting up to wash his plate, Marcus looked at me across that table with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not his usual laziness. Not his usual entitlement. Something focused, something prepared. He said, "So how long you been sleeping with rich white men for money, Simone?" The room didn't go quiet because the room was already quiet, but something in the air changed. I looked at him. I asked him what he just said. He said it again louder because my father had come back to the doorway. He said he'd seen me getting into Elliot's car, said he'd asked around, said people were talking, said everybody at church already knew that I'd been living some kind of double life, taking money from men, lying to this family about what I actually was. Every word was a lie, every single word. I had never taken $1 from Elliot. I had never let him pay so much as a dinner bill without splitting it because I was deeply, specifically committed to not becoming someone who could be bought. Marcus knew none of this because Marcus had constructed the story from the outside, from the image of what he assumed a woman like me must be doing with a man like that. He had no proof. He had no source. He had a fantasy of my degradation, and he dressed it up in enough detail to sound real. My father stood in that doorway and I watched his face. I watched him make the choice. It took maybe 4 seconds. 4 seconds to decide that Marcus, who had lied to him 100 times, was telling the truth, and that I, who had never once lied to this man, was not. He told me to get out of his house. I said, "Daddy, that is not true, not a word of it." He said he didn't want to hear it, said he was disappointed, said he didn't raise me for this. Said, and this one I have heard in my sleep every night since, he said he didn't know who I was anymore. I had 2 bags packed in 11 minutes. I know exactly how long because I was watching the clock, doing the only thing I knew how to do when my world collapsed, which was focus on something concrete and countable. 11 minutes. 2 bags, 26 years of being his daughter, and 11 minutes was all it took. I did not call Elliot. I want you to understand that. I did not go to him because I had no choice. I went to my friend Deja's couch first. I sat in her small living room with my 2 bags, and I cried for 2 hours in a way I had not cried since my mother left, that specific grief of being abandoned by someone who was supposed to choose you. And then I stopped crying, because I had learned by then that grief has to be given a limit, or it will take everything. I called Elliot the next morning. I told him what happened. I told him about Marcus's lie. I told him that my father had not asked a single question, had not asked for a single piece of evidence, had simply believed my brother and thrown me out. Elliot was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Where are you right now?" I told him. He said, "I'm coming." And here is where I need to tell you about Catherine Hargrove, because she is part of this story, and I will not flatten her into a villain or a saint, because she was neither. Catherine was Elliot's mother, 63 years old, from old Georgia money, the kind of white Southern woman who had been raised to smile at everyone and trust almost no one who wasn't already in her circle. She was elegant. She was controlled. And when Elliot brought me to meet her, 3 weeks after the night my father threw me out, she looked at me with eyes that I can only describe as calculating. not hostile. Calculating, she was running numbers. She was polite to my face. She was, I learned later, calling Elliot twice a day asking questions that all added up to one question she was too refined to ask directly. Is she after our money? I knew she was doing this. I'm not stupid and I have lived my whole life reading rooms where I was not entirely welcome. I said nothing. I did not complain to Elliot. I did not perform extra sweetness for Catherine's benefit. I showed up as myself, took nothing that wasn't offered, and trusted that time does the work that words cannot. What I did not yet know was that Marcus wasn't done. My brother, having successfully destroyed my relationship with my father, began expanding his operation. He told the story at church. He told it to cousins. He embellished it each time, the way liars do when nobody stops them, adding details, adding urgency, adding moral outrage that he had absolutely no right to feel. By the version that reached my Aunt Celestine in Macon, I was apparently living in Elliot's penthouse and had abandoned my entire family for a life of luxury and shame. The story reached me in pieces, through people who felt enough loyalty to text me what they were hearing. Each text felt like a separate small wound. Not because I cared what those people thought. I had spent 26 years caring what my family thought, and it had given me 2 bags and a couch. But because each retelling was Marcus choosing, again and again, to burn me down. What I kept asking myself, alone at night, was why? Why wasn't I enough of a nothing to just let go? Why, when he had already won, gotten me out of the house, out of Dad's orbit, out of the picture, why did he keep going? I think I know the answer now. I think Marcus needed me to be what he said I was. If I was fine, if I was building something real, if Elliot was genuine, if I was okay, then Marcus was just a liar who hurt his sister for no reason. But if I was actually a disgrace, if the story was true, then Marcus was just a man who told an uncomfortable truth. He needed me destroyed all the way down to justify himself. He didn't get that. I was 8 weeks pregnant when my father stood up in front of his Sunday school class and told them his daughter had chosen a life of sin over her family. I didn't know he'd done this until a week later. I was already sick with morning sickness, already quietly terrified about telling Elliot, not because I doubted him, but because everything was moving fast and I had a deeply ingrained habit of waiting for good things to collapse. I was sitting in the bathroom of the apartment I'd finally gotten for myself, not Elliot's place, my own apartment that I paid for with my accounting job that I had always had, when my cousin sent me a voice memo of my father's voice, shaking with what he probably told himself was righteousness. I sat on that bathroom floor for a long time. Then I got up, washed my face, and called Elliot. He drove over that night. We sat on my floor because I didn't have a couch yet, just a mattress and 2 boxes, and I told him about the baby. I watched his face. That face I had studied for months, learning it the way you learn something you plan to trust your life to. He went still. Then he reached over and took my hand and said, "Okay, so we're doing this." Not a question, a statement. A decision made in real time, plainly, without drama or condition. He proposed 6 weeks later. Not with some grand public gesture. He knew me better than that. He proposed in my kitchen at 7 in the morning while I was making eggs, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and he said, "I'd like to spend my life eating bad eggs and talking about tax law with you, if that's all right." I said yes, I cried. The eggs burned, it was perfect. We decided to tell his mother before we told anyone else. Catherine received the news with that same controlled stillness she applied to everything, but I noticed her eyes. They softened slightly when she looked at Elliot. And then they moved to me, and I held her gaze, and something passed between us, not warmth yet, but recognition. She was seeing me clearly for the first time, maybe. Seeing that I hadn't asked for anything. Seeing that her son was happy in a specific, settled way he apparently hadn't been in years. She stood, crossed the room, and took my hand formally, like a handshake, like a business agreement. She said, "Welcome to this family." It was the most measured welcome I had ever received, and somehow it meant more than if she'd hugged me, because I knew she meant it exactly as much as she showed. Marcus found out about the engagement through the same network he'd been poisoning with his stories. I don't know what he expected. Maybe he thought the lie would have reached Elliot by then, that someone would have told him, that I would have been too ashamed to hold on. What he did not expect was for none of that to matter. What he did next was the move of a desperate man who realizes the story he told isn't working. He called Elliot's office directly. He told the person who answered that he was my brother and he needed to speak to Mr. Hargrove about a personal matter concerning his fiancée. He left a message. The message was, essentially, a compressed version of every lie he'd been spreading: that I was manipulative, that I had a history of using men, that Elliot was being deceived, and that, as my brother, Marcus felt a familial obligation to warn him. Elliot's assistant played him that message. I know because Elliot came home, he had a key by then, and sat me down with the particular careful stillness of a man who is managing his own anger very deliberately, and he played it for me on his phone. I listened to my brother's voice lie about me in full sentences, calmly, to a stranger in a message left like a business inquiry, and I felt something shift inside me. Not break, shift. Like something that had been positioned wrong for a very long time finally clicked into its correct place. I was not angry in the screaming sense. I was clear, clarified. I had wondered for months whether I was being too hard on Marcus, whether his lie had been impulsive, whether underneath it he still had some brotherly instinct that might reemerge. This message answered that. This was deliberate. This was a campaign, and Marcus was going to keep running it until something stopped him. I looked at Elliot. I said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to let him finish." I didn't understand then. I do now. Elliot was the kind of person who understood that a liar given enough rope will eventually hang himself with it. He was patient in a way that I, trained by survival, always braced for impact, had never fully learned to be. He was patient and he was watching and he was, though I didn't know it yet, quietly collecting. The gala was in February, a fundraiser for a children's literacy foundation that Elliot chaired. I was 22 weeks pregnant, and I had a navy dress that somehow still fit, and I felt, walking into that ballroom with Elliot's hand at my back, like I had traveled so far from the woman who used to clean those conference rooms at midnight that the distance was almost dizzying. I made it through cocktail hour. I made it through dinner. I was standing near the bar drinking sparkling water and speaking to Catherine's friend Margaret about, of all things, tax-exempt charitable structures, because this is apparently just who I am, when the room tilted. That's the only way I can describe it. The room tilted, and my body made a decision without consulting me, and I went down. I woke up in Piedmont Hospital with Elliot's hand in mine and approximately $6,000 worth of monitors attached to me. The doctors said it was a combination of dehydration, blood pressure, and stress. That clinical word, stress, doing a great deal of heavy lifting for everything my body had absorbed in the past 6 months. The baby was fine. They wanted to monitor us overnight. Elliot had not left. 11 hours he sat in that chair, still in his tuxedo because no one had brought him anything else. His hair was a disaster. He had not slept. He looked, when I opened my eyes, like a man who had been through something, not just a long night, but the specific terror of almost losing something he hadn't known he needed until it was nearly gone. He leaned forward when he saw I was awake and he said, very quietly, "Hey." Just that, "Hey." And I started crying before I could stop myself because the gentleness of it, the simplicity of it, was so far from everything I had grown up believing I deserved. He had called my father. I found this out when the door opened. I want to tell you exactly how my father looked walking into that room, because I never want to forget it, and I think you need to see it to understand what came next. Raymond Dillard was 61 years old, a big man with broad shoulders that age had been slowly folding inward for years. He was wearing a church shirt because it was a Saturday, and he'd probably been at some church function. He had a look on his face that I recognized, the look of a man who has told himself a story about a situation and is about to walk into the actual situation and find out the story was wrong. He saw me first. His face did something complicated. Then his eyes moved and he found Elliot and he stopped walking entirely. Elliot stood up slowly. He did not extend his hand. He did not smile. He looked at my father with an expression that I can only describe as judicial, not hostile, not cold, but measuring, delivering a verdict that had already been reached. And then he said it, that sentence. The one my father had not been prepared for in any version of whatever story he'd been telling himself on the drive over. "So, you're the man who threw her out in the rain." My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Elliot said, "My name is Elliot Hargrove. I am going to marry your daughter. She is carrying my child. And before you say anything else in this room, I need you to look at this." He pulled out his phone, turned it so my father could see the screen, text messages. A whole conversation between Marcus and someone named Deshawn, a mutual friend Marcus apparently felt comfortable enough with to tell the actual truth. In those messages, Marcus described planting the lie. He described following me. He described deciding that if Simone had found a rich man, he was going to find a way to get access to that, or he was going to burn the whole thing. He described my father's reaction with something that can only be called satisfaction. Pops kicked her out, lol. Knew he would. He never really rocked with her like that anyway. My father read those messages twice. I watched him read them twice. I watched something happen to his face that I have no clean word for. It wasn't just shame. It wasn't just grief. It was the specific collapse of a man who has just seen irrefutable proof that he chose wrong. That he looked at two children and chose the one who was lying to him and discarded the one who was telling the truth. That he had been a fool and a cruel fool, and the cruelty had consequences that were now standing in a hospital room wearing a tuxedo at 7 in the morning, holding his daughter's baby in their belly. He looked at me. He couldn't hold my eyes for more than a second. Catherine walked in. I didn't know she was coming. Elliot had called her too, apparently. She was in a coat over what looked like pajamas, which for Catherine Hargrove was the equivalent of anyone else showing up in full crisis mode. She took in the room immediately, me in the hospital bed, Elliot standing, my father crumpling. And she walked directly to my father and stood in front of him in a way that made him have to look at her. She said, "I want to tell you something from one parent to another." He looked at her. She said, "I spent weeks questioning whether your daughter was good enough for my son. I asked the wrong question. The question was whether I was paying attention." She never asked Elliot for a single thing, not once. She kept her own apartment. She paid her own bills. She cried on her own time and showed up as something better every time I saw her. I missed that because I was looking for the wrong things. You missed it too. The difference is that I corrected myself. She let that land. Then she sat down on the chair in the corner and folded her hands and said nothing else, because Catherine Hargrove understood that the most powerful punctuation is silence. My father sat in the chair beside my bed. Nobody invited him, nobody stopped him, and he put his face in his hands. He sat like that for a long time. The monitors beeped. The hospital had that hospital smell. Outside the window, Atlanta was going about its Saturday. He finally looked up. He looked at me. His eyes were wet, which I had seen exactly once before in my life when his own mother died. He said, "Simone, I held up my hand. I need you to understand what I felt in that moment, because it was not what I expected to feel. I had spent 6 months imagining this, imagining my father being confronted with the truth, imagining what I would say, what he would say, what I would feel. I had imagined triumph. I had imagined that particular cold satisfaction of being proven right in front of someone who wronged you. I had imagined anger, the clean, burning kind that feels almost good. What I actually felt was tired. Tired and sad, the way you feel at the end of something that should never have happened at all, because none of this had been necessary. No hospital room, no gala collapse, no Marcus on the phone to Elliot's office, no church announcements, no 2 bags in 11 minutes. My father could have looked at me, his daughter, who had never lied to him, who still did his taxes, who showed up and asked a single question. Just one. "Simone, is this true?" That's all it would have taken. He didn't ask. I said, "I'm going to need time, Daddy." He nodded. That's all he did. He nodded. And somehow that small, humble, unpracticed nod from a man who had never once nodded in humility at anything I'd ever done meant that somewhere inside him, something had changed. I said, "You're going to be a grandfather. I'm not going to take that from this baby. But I need you to understand that you don't get to come back into my life the same way you left it. You don't get to act like what you did was a small thing. It was not a small thing." He said, "I know. Marcus lied to you, that's true, but you chose to believe him. That was you, Daddy, that choice was yours." He said, "I know, baby." And he cried. Raymond Dillard, who I had never once seen moved to tears by anything I did or suffered or accomplished, cried in a hospital chair while his daughter lay hooked to monitors carrying her first child. And I did not reach for him. Not yet. That would come, I genuinely believe it would come, but not yet. You cannot rush the kind of relearning that needed to happen between us. It would take time, and it would take work, and it would take him demonstrating, repeatedly, without reward, that he understood what he had broken. Marcus was not at that hospital. Marcus never called. What Marcus did in the weeks that followed was something I'm told small men always do when their schemes fall apart. He tried to reposition. He told my father that he'd been trying to protect the family. He told cousins that he'd been misunderstood. He constructed a new narrative in which he was a complicated figure who had made some mistakes but whose heart was in the right place. He sent me one text message that said, "I hope you're doing okay, sis." One text, no apology. No acknowledgement of anything specific. Just a 5-word attempt to reset the counter to 0 without paying any of the debt. I did not respond. I have not spoken to Marcus since. That is not a dramatic vow. It is not a performance of strength for anyone watching. It is the simplest accounting I have ever done. The cost of Marcus in my life has always been higher than any return he has ever offered. He is expensive in the ways that cannot be measured in money. I do not carry hate for him. Hate is also expensive, and I am on a budget that only has room for things that grow. My daughter was born on a Monday in June, loud and furious and perfect, with Elliot's nose and what I am told is my grandmother's forehead. We named her Ada for Ada Lovelace, because Elliot is a quiet nerd, and for my mother's mother, because I wanted something of the women who came before me woven into her name. Elliot cried when she was born, the kind of crying men do when they haven't planned for how large a feeling is. He held her for a very long time. My father was in the waiting room. He had been there since 4 in the morning. He had brought flowers that were slightly wrong, carnations, which nobody would have chosen, which is a detail so specific to my father's well-intentioned wrongness that I almost laughed when Elliot described it to me. He waited. He did not demand to come in. He did not call 5 times. He sat with those carnations and he waited to be invited. Elliot brought Ada out to him first, before me. I asked him too. I needed my father to see her before he saw me, because I needed his first feeling in that moment to be uncomplicated by whatever guilt and apology he had prepared for me. I needed him to just see her. He held her for, Elliot told me, a long time. And he said something quietly to her that Elliot couldn't fully hear, only one word of which was audible through the waiting room. The word was sorry. Catherine came in next, and whatever remaining ice had been between us had entirely, finally thawed. We stood together at the window of the room where Ada slept, and she put her arm around me in the careful way of a woman who is not a hugger but is trying, and she said, "She's extraordinary." And I knew she meant Ada, and I knew she also meant me, and I received both meanings. I don't have a tidy ending for you. Life doesn't really do tidy endings. It does continuations with varying degrees of light. My father calls now. He calls to say nothing important, to ask about Ada's sleeping schedule, to report what he watched on television, to fill space with presence in a way that I think is his version of practice, of learning how to simply be in my life without needing to manage or judge it. We are not repaired. We are repairing. There is a difference, and I think honoring that difference is the only honest thing I can do. Elliot and I married in September, small ceremony, 30 people. Ada in a white dress she immediately destroyed with her own drool. Catherine in the front row in a hat that was, in my opinion, slightly too much hat, and Deja as my maid of honor, ugly crying from the first note of music. My father walked me down the aisle. I chose that, I want to be clear about that. Nobody asked me to. It was not a performance of forgiveness or an announcement that everything was fine. It was a choice I made in full knowledge of everything he had done and everything he was still learning, because I decided that walking into my marriage carrying the full weight of what he'd done to me was something I didn't want to carry anymore. I gave it to the aisle. I left it there. And I walked out to Elliot with both hands free. Marcus was not invited. Some doors, when you close them, don't have handles on the inside. I used to clean office buildings at midnight. I used to lie awake on Deja's couch listening to the city outside and wondering whether I was going to be okay. I used to stand in front of my father's house with two bags in my hands, thinking that maybe this was just what my life looked like, something that gets discarded when it becomes inconvenient. I was wrong about that. I was wrong in ways that still take my breath away when I stop to think about them. Ada is asleep in the next room right now, making the specific sounds of a baby who is philosophically opposed to going down for a nap. Elliot is on a call downstairs, packing the way he does, and I can hear the low register of his voice through the floor like a heartbeat. I built this, not alone, I need to say that clearly, because the version of this story where the billionaire saved me is not my story. Elliot loved me. My choices kept me standing. Those are two different things, and both are true, and neither cancels the other. I was already saving myself. He just saw someone worth standing beside. My father is learning the difference between his son and his daughter. It is taking him a long time. I am giving him the time because Ada deserves a grandfather who is still alive to learn. As for Marcus, last I heard, he is still in Decatur, still borrowing money, still building castles out of other people's credibility and wondering why they don't hold. He will have to find his own way to whatever he's going to become. That is not my work. My work is right here. This life I built out of two bags and a midnight shift and a sad sandwich, and 20 minutes talking about tax law with a man who turned out to be exactly what he appeared to be, someone who showed up and stayed. That, I have decided, is the only thing worth building anything on. Not who your family told you that you were. Not the story your brother constructed out of his own fear and greed. Not the version of you that gets believed without evidence. The version of you that keeps going anyway. That gets up off Deja's couch anyway. That trusts, carefully, after everything anyway. Ada is awake. I can hear her now. She's decided the nap is over and the world needs to know about it. I'm going to go get her.